Well, welcome back, folks. One of the things I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about was when we're talking about stress, health, and coping, and it's very easy to get kind of bogged down in all of the stress aspects of it. But I want to talk a little bit about the healthy life. What does the healthy life look like? How do we help to flourish, despite the fact that we know that there are stressors in our lives and other things that make it hard for us sometimes to cope? So, I'd like to talk a little bit about the role of health psychology in understanding things like stress, health, and coping. So, the goal behind health psychology is to understand this role of psychology in maintaining health and preventing or treating illnesses. Now, because of the fact that we are living much longer than than we did in the historical past, many people are now presenting with chronic diseases. And a lot of that is due to sedentary lifestyles and other unhealthy kind of factors that lead to these chronic diseases. Because of that, psychology has seen an opportunity to find the connection between how the mind works and also how to respond and treat illness. And this is important. For example, heart disease is the #1 cause of death worldwide. Now, psychological factors determine the progression of chronic diseases and who develops diseases, as well as their prognosis and the nature of their symptoms. Many of the leading causes of illnesses in developed countries are often attributed to psychological and behavioral factors, which means as well that perhaps we can address them through psychological or behavioral interventions. So we think about like stress, smoking, and unhealthy eating habits. Now, one of the things that we've talked about at different times in this course is the biopsychosocial model of health. And what that posits is that biology, psychology, and social factors are just as important in the development of disease as biological causes are. Now, this model replaces the older biomedical model of health, which primarily considers the physical factors that contribute to illness. There is a growing understanding of the physiology underlying what we call the mind-body connection, and that's the role that different feelings can have on our body's function. This has led to the development of new areas of exploration and even new subfields of medicine and psychology. So, for example, psychosomatic medicine and psychoneuroimmunology. These fields are interested in understanding how psychological factors can get under the skin and influence our physiology in order to better understand how factors like stress can make us sick. Think also of the work in the textbook in chapter 4 that talks about epigenetic factors, right? So there is this understanding that things in our environment can lead particular genes to be turned on and off. In the same way, psychological factors can also influence how we become better and things that also make us sick. As we've talked about in a previous section, stress can predict our likelihood of developing both minor as well as major illnesses. And people who are less stressed and those who are more positive are at a decreased risk of developing a cold, and as well just have a general healthier prognosis in life. Now, Hans Selye initially used stress in a psychological manner, and he developed this whole concept of the general adaptation syndrome, which we've discussed elsewhere. But it's not just major life stressors that increase the likelihood of getting sick or developing a disease. Studies have shown that even small daily hassles, like getting stuck in traffic or fighting with your girlfriend, can raise your blood pressure, alter your stress hormones, and even suppress your immune system function. So the question then is, how do we protect our health? Now, what keeps us protected from a disease and what keeps us alive longer? Well, 5 factors have often been studied in terms of their ability to protect and sometimes to harm our health. And those are things like our own ability to cope, our control, how we feel about how much control or self-efficacy we have in a situation, the types of social relationships we have, our own personal dispositions and emotions, as well as our stress management skills. Let's talk for a minute about coping strategies. So oftentimes we put coping into 2 categories. We talk about problem-focused coping, and that's when we actively address the event that's causing the stress in an effort to solve it. We see a problem, we're trying to solve it. So for example, If the stress in our life is a midterm, that would mean that the way that we solve or the way that we cope is that we're spending additional time studying to make sure we understand the material. On the other hand, we can also have what's called emotion-focused coping, and that's helpful for us so that we can regulate the emotions that come with stress. So for example, if we're feeling high amounts of anxiety about this midterm, maybe we'll watch a funny movie or spend some time on TikTok to take our mind off the anxiety that we're feeling about this upcoming test. Now, as you can see, these are two strategies. Both are useful, but only within a certain context. In the short term, emotion-focused coping might reduce these feelings of stress, but in the long term, problem-focused coping has the greatest meaningful impact on our mental wellness. Now, there are times when we need to rely on emotion-focused coping first because of the magnitude of the experience that we have. So for example, the death of a loved one or any other kind of uncontrollable things. Perhaps in those situations, an emotion-focused coping strategy may be most helpful in the beginning. But in the long term, actually solving the problem is better. Now, some research has also looked at this idea and this concept of self-efficacy and control. Now, if we have the belief that we have control over a situation, we tend to be able to cope with the situation in a much more adaptive way. When we feel like we don't have control, then we don't try and change. We feel sometimes that we are overwhelmed and therefore just kind of have no ability to exert any of our own efficacy. Now, people with greater self-efficacy believe that they can complete tasks and reach their goals. And so if we have higher levels of self-efficacy, this can actually reduce stress and negative health behaviors. Now, interestingly enough, something as simple as having control over the care of a house plant has been shown to improve health and longevity for some folks. So sometimes a psychological intervention can simply be that we help people to feel like they have more control over a situation than perhaps what they perceive that they have. That in turn increases their self-efficacy and their ability to act on their situation and make different and hopefully healthier choices. Social relationships can not be stressed enough as such an important factor in maintaining health and wellness. The impact of social isolation on our risk for disease or death is similar to the risk associated with smoking regularly. Now that is a powerful and a big thing that many of us should attend to. In particular, over the last 20 months, we have definitely seen the negative impact of social isolation on overall mortality rates, not just in Canada, but across the entire globe. Now, social integration is this idea that the more roles that we have, and the more integrated we are within a social fabric, in a social context or community, the healthier that we tend to be. When we maintain these roles, this can actually improve our health because it encourages those around us to engage with us, and it also encourages us to maintain a healthy lifestyle. Those people within our social network might also provide us with social support. So when we're under stress, having people that just care about us and that we know care about us is an important factor in maintaining health and helping us to adequately deal with stress in our lives. Now, in addition to this, we also know that there are certain dispositional and emotional factors that are important for us. There are some emotional factors and emotional states that are just more protective and others that are more risky. So what are they? Well, we know that negative dispositions and personality traits have been strongly tied to an array of health risks. In the 1950s, there was a very interesting study done by two cardiologists, and they discovered that there were certain common behavioral and psychological patterns among their heart patients that were not present in other patient samples. And so they talked about this idea of type A and type B behavior. So type A behavior, this was the group that was identified within this study. These are people that tend to be competitive, impatient, hostile, and time urgent. And this pattern of emotional disposition is associated with double the risk of heart disease compared with type B behavior. Now, this makes sense because we know that hostility and competitiveness are especially harmful to heart health. Now, we know then that there are some positive factors that are helpful in maintaining protective health. So for example, positive traits and states are health protective, even in the most poor and underdeveloped nations. Positive emotions can also serve as a bit of an antidote to stress and protect us against some of its damaging effects. And that makes sense if we think about this just at face value. If we tend to engage in a negative pattern and have negative emotions associated with stress, well, that negative cycle is in essence a bit of a feedback loop and can lead to other forms of pathology and concern for us. Whereas, if we're able to take things with a little bit more kind of a positive spin, it helps us to perhaps reframe some things, it helps us to see options, and perhaps increases all of these other areas of resiliency, like having more social support, feeling like we have more control, which then leads to a better outcome for us. Now, stress management is a very important thing, and there are some interventions that really help us to reduce the aversive responses to stress and duress. So, for example, breathing exercises, muscle relaxation, mental imagery, these things have been found to be very effective. I'm going to talk about two that have been very helpful for people with a lot of stress. One of them is called biofeedback, and that's a technique where you're given feedback from your body that's not normally available to you, and then you're taught strategies to alter the signal. So, for example, perhaps someone would be measuring your heart rate or your blood pressure, those types of things. And so when you are given feedback that, for example, you're feeling more stressed, you are taught strategies then to actually decrease your heart rate, to decrease your blood pressure, and just maybe to calm your system a little bit. Another very helpful strategy is called mindfulness-based stress reduction, or MBSR. And it's a method for cultivating mindful awareness of your body through various relaxation and meditational techniques. These techniques have been found to help people in very high stress careers, such as lawyers and teachers, doctors in emergency room contexts, to help them to better manage their personal stress through mindfulness-based activities, which in turn has led to greater job satisfaction, ability to participate within their work in a meaningful way, and overall just better health outcomes as well. So reducing stress is not something that needs to be complicated. There are many different things that we can do, and probably some of the things that we can do are some of the easiest things. So for example, exercise is a great stress reduction activity, especially some moderate cardiovascular exercise, at least 3 times a week, can be a very, very helpful factor for decreasing risk of depression and many, many other things as well. So it doesn't have to be complicated or fancy. It just needs to be something that gets the job done and helps us to feel that we can manage our stress in a better way and have a more adaptive response when stress comes. Now, I always feel bad talking about this kind of stuff because oftentimes for college students, there's not always a lot of opportunity for you to kind of balance all these areas in your life. So good grades, social life, enough sleep, all those things. It is very challenging. And yet we do know that good health practices, good health hygiene is important for us. Especially during times of stress, having positive health practices are so important. So we already know that when we're stressed, our immune system is compromised. So we need to do things then to help to keep our immune system healthy. Now, psychologists study both health behaviors and health habits. Now, health behaviors are the things that we can improve or that harm our health. And these behaviors become habits once we have established them and they're firmly part of our everyday life and we can complete them automatically. Now, many people now use the internet for health information, and that's a really great thing. And in many ways, it's a great way for the democracy of information. But it's not always good because we tend to do a poor job of assessing the credibility of health information. And the credibility of health information often means whether we're going to think something is helpful for us to respond to or whether something will just kind of dismiss it. So after individuals decide to seek care, there's also variability in the information that we tend to give to our medical providers. So for example, one of the things that we know is that poor communication can influence the effectiveness of any prescribed treatment, right? The other problem is that not everybody adheres to medical recommendations, which is a bit of a challenging thing. Now, one of the things that psychologists are particularly interested in studying is as mobile technology improves, as our smartphones become even smarter, how do we help now to track and monitor health adherence? And how do we work to improve people's adherence so that they can do a better job of adhering to medications that they need to take or lifestyle changes that they need to engage in order to have better outcomes. Now, clinical health psychologists and clinical health psychology is actually a very interesting field. It looks at evaluating physical, personal, and environmental factors that contribute to illness and preventing and things that prevent improved health. Researchers in these areas, they work in numerous locations, but generally are found in universities and university hospital contexts. And clinical health psychologists are interested in this area of behavioral medicine. And so some of the things that they tend to look at are things like, how do we help people with sleep training? How do we help to train people to decrease their risk of future heart attacks? How do we help with so many of these kind of clinical intersections between psychology and health? The future of health psychology is that we're moving beyond just studying risk in isolation, and we're working now to look at these factors of resilience and protection from disease as well. So there's such a strong growing interest in studying the positive factors that protect our health, and that's important information for us to know, isn't it? Now, Martin Seligman had proposed that there should be a field of positive health to study those who exhibit above average health. And this is kind of a nice little segue into this idea of positive psychology. Now, positive psychology focuses on the strengths, virtues, and talents that contribute to successful functioning and enables individuals and communities to flourish. It was spearheaded by a group of positive psychologists, but in particular, former president of the American Psychological Association, Martin Seligman. He is a very big name kind of in this area. And positive psychology looks at the intersection of using scientifically informed perspectives to measure things about the human condition that lead to happiness, fulfillment, and flourishing. And so it really shifts away from focusing on distress, disorder, and dysfunction, which tends to be the kind of more medical model of psychology that's used for many psychologists. The principal claim of positive psychology is that the study of health, fulfillment, and well-being is as deserving of study as things like illness, dysfunction, and distress. Now, in order to study this, positive psychologists had to create numerous different ways of capturing these areas of positive psychology. And so one of the measures that they created was called the Values in Action, or the VIA Strengths Survey. So in 2004, Peterson and Seligman looked for virtues that were present across all cultures and time. And so they came up with 6 core virtues: courage, justice, humanity, temperance, transcendence, and wisdom. And they created a classification of strengths that helped to kind of identify and specify particular positive traits. Now, if you follow this link, you can actually take the VIA Strengths Survey all on your very own. And I would encourage you to do so because I think it's a helpful thing to look at maybe what's going right in your life and what are some helpful things from there that you can take to improve your life and to better align yourself to your strengths. So the VIA has been called the positive psychology counterpart to the DSM, and unlike the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the VIA classifies positive human strengths, whereas the DSM classifies deficits and disorders. So within the VIA, you can identify your own strengths. It's about 240 questions. It'll measure things like gratitude, and it does a really nice job of operationalizing these constructs. Now, worldwide, the following strengths are most associated with positive life satisfaction. Things like hope, zest, gratitude, and love. And the researchers who developed the VIA call these strengths of the heart. And the strengths associated with knowledge are least correlated with life satisfaction, interestingly. So perhaps the more we know, the happier we're not. That might be an interesting thing. Now, here's an important caveat. Now, obviously keep in mind the fact that I am not a positive psychologist per se, even though I think positive psychology plays an important role in our overall understanding of people. My argument would be that while focusing on strengths is necessary, I don't think it's sufficient, and I don't think it captures a full picture of a person. Because if we only say, well, we only focus on strengths and we're never interested in deficits, we're not really painting a full picture of a person either. Now, I'm going to talk more about this in our lecture on personality, so I'm just going to leave this caveat here for now, and we'll pick up and kind of look at what that means at a later point in time. Now, the science of positive psychology has kind of found 10 key things that are important for us to kind of be aware of, and perhaps are a little bit interesting. One of the things it's found is that most people are actually happy, and that happiness is the cause of good things in life and not simply a result of success or good outcomes. Happy people tend to make good things happen in their lives. The third thing, political conservatives are happier than political liberals. 4, most people are resilient. They bounce back from adversity, large and small. 5, happiness, strengths of character, and good social relationships are buffers against the damaging effects of disappointments and setbacks. And they're good things for us to remember, aren't they? Number 6, which is important for many people, is religious faith matters. People for whom religion is important are happier and cope better with stress compared to non-believers. 7, money makes an ever-diminishing contribution to well-being, but money can buy happiness if it's spent on other people. Number 8, as a route to a satisfying life, eudaimonia, which is a life of meaning, trumps hedonism, which is a life of pleasure. It's an important one for us to remember in these days when that is emphasized so much. Number 9, good days have common features. We feel autonomous, competent, and connected to others. And number 10, the good life can be taught. This is not something that is just for some people out there, but we can grasp many of these lessons and find ways to live them in a meaningful way in our lives. Now, I'm going to talk briefly here about 3 key strengths that have been the focus of positive psychology and are things that you can apply today in your life in a new way that can be helpful for you in buffering some of the effects of stress and improving your health and your coping. One of them is forgiveness. Forgiveness is essential to harmonious long-term relationships between individuals. Now we talk about kids, often to kids, and we tell them they need to forgive things and get over things, and then we become adults and we somehow pretend that this doesn't matter or doesn't, isn't something that applies to us. And yes, it does. Overall, forgiveness is something that we need to be able to have harmony with other people in our lives. And it is a very powerful pro-social process. It can benefit human social life by helping relationships to heal, and it might be the critical element that we are missing for world peace. Now, there are many incredible stories of people forgiving people for horrible crimes and atrocities that were committed to them. And for many of us, it'll never reach that level. But practicing forgiveness and learning to forgive and to let go of things instead of holding on and festering is important. So there's a very oft-quoted thing: holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. And so forgiveness is something that is an important practice for us. There are, in fact, now forgiveness interventions. Now, this can involve counseling and exercises that help people move from anger and resentment towards forgiveness. People who are able to forgive are more likely to have better interpersonal functioning and therefore social support. And the act of forgiveness can result in less anxiety and depression, better health outcomes, increased coping with stress, and increased closeness to God and to other people as well. Gratitude is a feeling of appreciation or thankfulness in response to receiving a benefit. Gratitude is something that we can practice on a daily basis. And there's a lot of research that shows that gratitude is something that is so helpful and has so many benefits for us. It's important because it helps us to feel and to do good. And gratitude interventions are something that you can apply starting today. So one of the most common gratitude interventions is, at the end of the day, finding and reflecting back on your day and finding 3 things that you are thankful for, that you have gratitude for. That simple act of just finding those 3 things can improve your happiness, health, sleep quality, and in some cases, even academic performance. It also fosters in us the savoring of positive life experiences and situations and helps us with that positivity, which is a protective factor in our health. If we consciously remind ourselves of our blessings, it's harder to take them for granted and to adapt to them, and we begin to view things with greater gratitude. Finally, humility is something that is a very important virtue within positive psychology that has meaningful implications for us today. It's a psychological and intellectual virtue or character strength. and it involves an accurate sense of one's abilities and achievements, the ability to acknowledge our imperfections, an openness to new ideas, an ability to forget ourselves and to get ourselves out of the way, and an appreciation of the value of all things. Now, this is a very hard thing to practice. While we talk about it and we make it sound very easy, humility is something that takes practice, and it takes a lot of self-awareness on our part to know that we are not the center of the world, and yet we can be good at things, and we can do lots of great things, but that those things in and of themselves don't define us, and that even within that we can hold our successes with humility and with grace. And it's positively associated with numerous benefits like flourishing and academic success. Now, this obviously, as a lecture, is such a very, very brief overview of so many important things, but I want you to take the time, and I hope you take the time, to think about how some of these positive psychology lessons can be applied in a meaningful way to your life over the next term and over your life, and that they can be sources of strength for you as you combat the various stresses and things that you will encounter. Thank you for your time today, and we'll talk soon.